Hello, everybody. I am L. Andrew Cooper, and today I will be reading from my novel Noir Falling, a bizarre mystery of art and the mind. Previously, I did a video reading from part one of the novel, Square Peg. I read chapter one, Misadventure at the Ankara Cafe. So if you missed that video, you might want to go back and either watch it or just listen to it because I read the first chapter. This video was about the second chapter, so I'm picking up where I left off. Chapter two, Inside the Blank. Daniel felt glad when the black volume that held him, the black volume that somehow allowed him to see, lightened, settling on a silver gray. At first looking down brought on tremendous vertigo, as nothing supported his feet or seemed to exist at all anywhere beneath him. Nothing justified his suspension in space, but he quickly accepted that some invisible plane kept him aloft, and his innards stopped twisting. He still felt oriented to the Ankara, with a phantom sense of the stairwell behind him, so he walked forward, toward the second level's far side, past the point where the table he'd shared with Chuck would have been, to the alcove where the restrooms should have been, and through the place that might have stopped him with the legacy of a wall. No trace of a wall, or anything else, impeded him, and he kept going. Eventually he turned left, and he found the gray volume in that direction to be very much the same. This isn't a dot of nothing, he said, or anti-experience. He half expected his voice to echo through the volume's vastness, but the sound traveled a short distance and stopped with a dull thud. Talking to himself probably wasn't the smartest move anyway. Current circumstances suggested he trod perilously on the Kyle side of life. Nevertheless, he announced a conclusion he felt necessary for existential and phenomenological integrity. I'm here, wherever here is, and experiencing it, wherever it is. He thought of Chuck, devoured by periwinkle whorls. A voice, not his own because it was high-pitched and girlish, giggled. Daniel stopped walking. Hello? Hi, the voice said. Are you here with me? For all intents and purposes, wherever you are is my here, and that's where I am. Daniel massaged his temples. I'm having a challenging day, or part of one. I don't know. Even commenting on my day is challenging. Could you maybe tell me where here is, or who you are? Who I am is something you might not like. Despite the vastness of gray around him, Daniel did not feel much room for insisting on preferences. I am open to things I might not like. I'm the voice in your head. Okay, I just saw my friend Chuck eaten by these mini color tornadoes, and now I'm hearing voices. There's a certain logic to that. The gray provided no help. I can help when there's no one else, the voice said. That's comforting, Daniel lied. He didn't know why he spoke aloud. The voice seemed privy to anything in his head. And I should call you Voice? You couldn't pronounce my real name anyway. Daniel wondered why his head would produce this voice. Why not Chuck's voice? If Daniel was in a Kyle way of being, Chuck's voice might be proper, in a brotherly fashion. Unless Chuck truly had been erased. Unless Chuck... And don't worry about Chuck, he's fine. You'll see him soon, Voice tittered. Daniel nodded, processing. And I suppose that server at the cafe is fine, too? What server? Voice asked. Never mind, Daniel said. So, where are we? Voice hummed. You ask tough questions. Would you believe you have... Recently you were calling them idiosyncrasies. An idiosyncrasy that is accessible to others? No, Daniel said. He expressed the negative belief firmly, but then wondered why. Looking at his shoes, black, leather, slip-on, and at the structureless gray volume beyond, he understood that, at present, he lacked support for any beliefs. Okay, maybe. Let's make things easier, Voice said, and give this place a name. Let's call it the blank. As in, my mind is a blank, Daniel offered. The is very important, Voice corrected. The blank, then, Daniel said. Then the blank, idiosyncratically, it's private. Meaning you won't tell me? Daniel resented that Voice felt she was certainly a she, had license to be coy. Did incorporeal voices have a right to privacy? But she might have been corporeal, residing, naturally, in Daniel's corpus. Voice in his head. No, dingus, Voice said, and Daniel could hear her roll her eyes. It's private, meaning the blank is a private place for you to, how does that song you like go? Catch up on your mind, and to, you said accessible to others, like other people, Daniel said, looking around the gray vacancy. That doesn't sound private. This, the blank, looks private, but it doesn't sound private. You can have, and will have, Voice lowered herself to a whisper, secret meetings. Like this one? With you? No, now that we've met, we'll stick together if you don't mind, Voice said. If I mind? Mind. The word had troubling implications. You don't, Voice said. We don't have to be in the blank to have our chats. I wanted to be here now, though, or a few minutes from now, to see the kickoff, the stimulus, the response to which is you becoming the center of your own story, the hero of your own adventure. Daniel stitched his eyebrows together and, having nowhere else to focus, looked at his right shoulder. How do I become... Voice groaned. Stop worrying about taking action to become the sort of self you think you should be. Daniel slanted his lips in his shoulder's direction. Stop worrying. Okay, I'll step on the worry brakes. You seem to believe you need to perform some internal feat to produce an identity that corresponds with a set of preconceptions, like your little sexual panic over Chuck. It wasn't a panic. Daniel addressed Voice, but recognized he was also reassuring himself. He also acknowledged that he didn't know whether addressing Voice was in any way different from addressing himself. Yeah, well, whatever helps you get through the day. Voice was rather condescending for a dialogic construct of Daniel's imagination. Perhaps she was something else. Anyway, Mr. Cool, my point is that interiority is a myth. Interiority, by which you mean... Voice's already high pitch got higher. A space inside you occupied by a sort of homuncular soul or consciousness kind of thing that drives your body and makes decisions and produces a you rooted in, I don't know, metaphysical transcendence or some bullshit like that. Oh, Daniel said. He had trouble following Voice's pathway from sexual panic to metaphysical transcendence. He didn't recall making any claims about metaphysical transcendence, but he also rejected Voice's claim that he had panicked over Chuck, so maybe the point was moot. Voice made a sound as if she had a throat and was clearing it. You, and by you I mean everybody, are, or is, no more and no less than an aggregate of outputs triggered by inputs received over time. Inputs might be biological or environmental, chemical or social, and outputs are behavioral, even when they loop back on themselves and create the illusion that they're happening internally without the impetus of external inputs. Behavior is tricky to think about, though, because people behave, but cells and neurons and muscles and organs behave too. Stimulus and response govern everything, multiplied and cross-referenced by their aggregated millions or billions. Behaviorism, determinism. Didn't that kind of thinking go out 40 or 50 years ago? Daniel looked up as he asked. Not at all, Voice said. That's why your dinner society talked about brain chemistry and relativism instead of consciousness and relativism. Consciousness is comforting. Having your world determined by the chemicals in your brain is not. Determinism is an iceberg of practical reckoning, ready to sink the most titanic trips of wishful thinking. Daniel felt a weakness in his legs and wanted to sit, which gave him an idea. He walked a short distance, turned in a half circle, and squatted as if lowering himself into a chair. Sure enough, a seat, a quite comfortable seat, received him. The only sense the seat presented itself to was the tactile, but in a sitting position. Daniel felt the chair's arms and back and cushioning. Daniel settled in before saying, accepting that interiority is a myth would be easier if I wasn't talking to a voice in my head and sitting in a place that seems imaginary. Well, Voice sighed. You know what they say, a girl can lead a horse to water. I thought the perspective could be useful for you well, before I become the hero of my own adventure, Daniel said. Hero might be too strong a word to get us started, but you are becoming and will become, as becoming is a constant in constancy, always changing with new inputs, but what am I becoming? No thing is ever a fixed thing, I have to admit, so give me a straight answer. A detective, Voice said. After a fashion, a private dick. How do you even know? Shh, she said. It's time. Time for what? To begin from a certain perspective. With that, Voice vanished. Daniel didn't know how he knew she was gone. Nothing other than her noise had informed her presence, but something beyond silence announced her absence. Had she been like a second person far away in a large, cold room, too distant for her heat to make a difference, but still a reassuring ripple in the biting air and comfortless light? Not that this gray volume had any discernible light sources. A new noise, a low rumble like a tiger purring, proclaimed the approach of an engine, an automobile, a fine automobile, the kind that might be inaudible if any other sounds attended, and had the courtesy to disguise it. The gray volume around Daniel's invisible seat contained no other sounds, but in the direction the seat faced, at an immeasurable distance not too far, clouds appeared and thickened. The purring tiger got closer, and as the clouds parted, Daniel stood. From the clouds appeared a black vehicle, sleek, timeless, long, stretched, a limousine. Its headlights were bright but had no discernible effect on the gray. The windows were as black as the vehicle's body, hiding driver, passenger, or whatever phenomena the limo portended. Most outstanding, the luxury automobile gleamed. Unknowable light sources made painted metal and tinted glass shine and sparkle, radiant black. Importance. Wealth. The limo drove directly toward Daniel, clouds closing but not disappearing behind it, and turned as it got to him so that he faced the driver's side. The driver's doors opened, and a man in a gray suit with a double-breasted jacket got out. The suit looked too expensive to be a chauffeur's uniform, but the man, likely East Asian, of medium height, athletic, and inexpressive, wore a classic chauffeur's cap that made his role unmistakable. He walked back to a side door and opened it, stepping away. A long, smooth, shapely leg, ending in a bright red, very high-heeled shoe, extended from the newly opened door. The red dress, split up to the thigh, almost as radiant as the limousine unleashing it, followed as the second leg joined the first. Seeing the legs almost knocked Daniel back into his invisible chair. Now the whole woman stood by the limousine, scanning the space around her. Her elegant straight black hair hung far past her shoulders, halfway down her back, with locks at her sides framing an ample chest the dress did everything to enhance. Her complexion, like the driver's, suggested East Asian descent. Daniel might have guessed Chinese, but he neither knew nor cared. She might have been in her 30s, sophisticated, graceful. His eyes traced the curves linking her chest to her narrow waist to the hips he wanted to hold. Even from this distance her eyes possessed depths he would fear to fathom. He felt them. He felt them because she put them on him. She stepped away from the limo toward Daniel. The driver closed her door, went back to his, and disappeared inside the vehicle. The woman continued to move toward Daniel, high-heeled steps echoing where no echo had been before, as if she walked across marble tiles in a vault. Realizing she was almost as tall as he, Daniel stretched his back, straining for 6 feet. He tidied his blazer. He pushed his glasses up on his nose and attempted a smile, but his lips refused proper alignment. She stopped in front of him. When she returned his smile, lips pressed together, their corners faintly curled, the vast volume of the blank seemed more silver than gray. Clouds that had been behind the limo spread around them in a broad, circular perimeter. "I'm glad to see you," the woman said. Her accent was American. "We don't have much time, but at least here, in the blank, we're safe." He wasn't so overwhelmed by having his attraction to her turn his body inside out that he couldn't be stunned by hearing her utter the blank, a term for this place that he thought Voice had recently coined. Was this feminine vision, like Voice, a conjuration of his Kyle-like mind? He hoped not. Fantasies tended to disappoint by ending too soon. "We don't have much time." "Why the hurry?" She put a hand on his cheek, soft and warm, sending tingles down to his stomach. "You're so new." "I'm Daniel," he said. She laughed. Her laugh wasn't giddy or giggly, a laugh Voice would have laughed, but from inside her chest, a brief, womanly laugh that made her eyelids droop for an instant before she refocused and lowered the hand that left his cheek throbbing. "Mr. Lowe, I'm here for your help. If you think a woman like me isn't beyond help." "Beyond, of course not." She reached into a small purse that he hadn't noticed hanging from her shoulder and pulled out a delicate, florally patterned pouch from which she withdrew a thin cigarette. He wished he had a lighter, but she pulled one from the same pouch and, balancing the skinny stick between painted lips, offered the lighter to him. After a few flicks, he managed to set the dangling stick ablaze, unable to avoid gawking at the firelight reflected in the woman's eyes. She turned her head, exhaled a hypnotic plume, and said, "Thank you." The floral pouch went back into her purse. Daniel held up the lighter. Please," she said, "keep it." He shoved it into his pocket and blushed. She tipped backward. He reached forward, afraid she might fall, and sat on an invisible surface. She crossed her legs and smoked. Lipstick smudged the end of the filter between her fingertips. "The problem," she said, "I'm terribly afraid, is, unfortunately, my husband." Daniel returned to his invisible chair, facing her. "How can I help?" "Mr. Lowe, maybe I should start with who we are?" She blew smoke in his face. He didn't mind. "I've tried that," he said. She knew he was Lowe, Daniel Lowe, not a hint of Kyleness. Her face flashed a quizzical expression before resettling into inscrutable, sad allure. "My name is Isabella Zhao. My husband is Jianyu Zhao." She pronounced her husband's name as if Daniel should recognize it. He didn't, so he nodded to encourage her to go on sharing information. "Jianyu Zhao, CEO of the Mass Zone International Corporation?" As she took a drag from her cigarette, she fluttered eyelashes longer than Chuck's. Mass Zone, Mass Zone, Mass Zone. That name was familiar. Alternative energy, defense contracting, consumer electronics, imports and exports. The list went on. The zone takes care of its own. "Heard of it," Daniel said. He wanted to be Isabella Zhao's cigarette. "Then you might have a sense of how big it is," Isabella said. Her eyes fell to what would have been the floor, or how big he is. He is powerful, important. My husband and his company are everywhere. Almost, or might as well be. Is he, is he, is he mean to you? Was Daniel a child? Isabella looked to the side. Daniel looked with her and noticed the perimeter of clouds coming closer. He's an indifferent jailer, she said, except for when he wants to exhibit me. Then he becomes jealous, possessive of my details, anxious to puppeteer. Jail, pup. He keeps you locked away somewhere? In a momentary vision, Daniel saw, spreading from behind her red dress, glorious, angelic, white feathery wings, clipped. Isabella glanced back at the limousine, which Daniel had forgotten. Its tiger engine still purred. I have the means to slip away now and then, she said, but mostly, yes, I am a prisoner. That's terrible, Daniel said. Unthinkable. Mr. Lowe, I beg you not to take me for an innocent. Nobody could marry Jianyu Zhao and Mass Zone International and be completely naive. Huh, Daniel said. Isabella leaned forward and stubbed out her cigarette in what might have been an ashtray on a table between them, though nothing was visible. The cigarette stub seemed to float, immobile, with a corona of ash. I walked into his web, knowing full well what sort of creature spins a web. Daniel's throat tightened. Zhao the spider, he squeaked. Mass zone. Reality, that thing defined by a consensus of the mass, was a mass zone. Unless you were Kyle. Unless... Retrieving the floral pouch from her purse, Isabella readied another cigarette. Daniel struggled to dig the lighter from his pocket and, successful, wasted no time providing a flame. Again, Isabella smoked. Have you given spider webs much thought? She asked. Given his black clothes and the volume of silver gray around him, which retained its feeling of vastness despite the closing perimeter of darker gray clouds, Daniel considered that he might have thought more about spider webs than the average person. Maybe no? I would say there are several types of webs, several types of spiders. I wouldn't know about any of that, Isabella said, exhaling smoke. I'm talking about the classic web, concentric circles around intersecting lines, with the big spider body sitting in the middle, waiting for prey. Okay? So you walk out onto the web, half knowing the danger but not realizing its depth until you feel your feet starting to stick and get a good look at that massive spider in the middle, which is hungrier and deadlier than you'd ever realized. Hungry, deadly, Daniel said. Your husband. There's so much room in the web, and the spider has conspired to fill it up, to capture as many people as possible in its filaments, and it sits there in the center, turning in circles, watching everyone caught up in its conspiracies. Zhao the spider conspires to... Daniel felt himself adrift in abstraction. Everybody's feet stick to the web, but no one is completely stuck. Anyone could run away, but the problem is, moving on the web sends vibrations to the spider that get its attention, and you never know when the spider might be looking, but you do know that if its attention falls on you, and it decides to go after you, it is too fast, too strong for you to escape. It could see you at any moment, and if it sees you misbehaving, trying to leave the web where you're sticking, it could destroy you. So you're trapped, partly by the spider, partly by the web, partly by your own fear, and partly by doing what got you into the web in the first place. You are complicit in your own entrapment. You are, in part, your own jailer. Bewildered, Daniel said, I am? The worst thing is that, sticking to the web, you know you help lure others in. Your complicity extends to the entrapment of others. You are part of the conspiracy. I'm not part of anything. The dinner society. You might have been part of that. I've tried running away, but the web is endless. or part of a system of interlocking webs, mass zone. As she trailed off, Isabella looked toward the closing circle of clouds. My husband, or his proxies, always pick up my vibrations and bring me back. Proxy spiders. The world is a jigsaw of webs. Daniel understood what Isabella described, even as her references eluded. These proxies could be anywhere and seem to be everywhere, so you never know and always feel them watching. You're always in a web, and there's always the threat of surveillance. Even when I'm not in my cell, I am in a cell, and I monitor my own behavior because getting too far out of line will bring them faster. Here we're safe for a time, but even here, the dark gray clouds rumbled. This circle, Daniel said. Concentric circles. These clouds. Isabella stood and paced in front of her invisible chair. The table between them, with the ashtray, must have been very narrow. People have been ruined. People have lost their lives. And I have played a part. I am not an innocent. Daniel stood, resolute. I don't care. Isabella halted. What? Please, you must, flustered, Daniel corrected. I do care about you, I mean, about us in this web, but I don't care about your innocence or guilt, complicity. I want to help you. You must. I will. But them, who? The spiders? The men in gray suits. Daniel thought of the chauffeur with the double rusted gray jacket. He looked at the limo. No, not my driver, Isabella said, resuming pacing more slowly and stomping out her cigarette on the invisible plane that supported them. He is an exception. The others, like eyes. Isabella turned where she stood, and as she did, the cloud perimeter dispersed, revealing a circle of men in single-breasted gray suits, black ties, and red shirts. Over their faces they wore masks that made their heads look like giant eyeballs. They stood still and watched. Flummoxed, impotent, Daniel cried, What do you want to do? Isabella locked her eyes on his. I want you to save me from it all, she replied. Why? How? Not long ago she was having a conversation with a voice in his head. What was he to become? Who was he to become a savior to a woman so, and from a man who was clearly so, so, Me? Daniel asked. You're the only one who can. With admirable balance on her high heels, Isabella took backward steps toward the limousine. The gray-suited men watched. Me? She kept moving backward as if compelled. Say you'll take the case. The case? With no help from the driver, who, Daniel presumed, stayed behind the wheel of the vehicle that had never stopped running, Isabella's side door opened. Please, Isabella yelled. I, 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 a detective, voice had said. After a fashion, a private dick. But I don't even have a gun, Daniel protested. I don't even like guns. Isabella folded backward into the limo. Please, she repeated. Her legs retreated inside. Confused, Daniel looked at the lidless eyeball masks of the many motionless, gray-suited men who offered no suggestions. The limo's door slammed shut. I will, Daniel shouted. I will save you. And, like the Ankara cafe before it, the blank absconded. End of chapter 2 of Noir Falling. Thank you very much for either watching or listening or both, depending on what you've done. I hope you have enjoyed. Don't forget to pick up your copy of Noir Falling on Amazon.com and read the rest. It only gets better and weirder from here.